Hey everybody, we're glad you're here for the FBC Okeechobee podcast. I appreciate everybody that joins us and listens in, follows along, whether you're checking us out on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're getting this at. But we're still in Mark.
Yes.
Probably going to be there for a while. I said that with like a question mark, didn't
Yes.
I? Going to be there for probably a long time. But Jesus here in Mark chapter 8, we're going to start with verses 11 and 12. And he has another run-in with Pharisees. This is a constant. This is a constant for him. These people absolutely despised him, and so they come at him in every way that they can think of. And this is, to me, one of the most disrespectful ones that they do when you really look into what they're saying. I just want to look at verse 11 and 12, then there's a couple other verses that we'll probably get to as well. It says, when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him, testing him. They demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority. When he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign. So they wanted another miracle. They hadn't already seen any. You go back way earlier where Jesus he was at Peter's mother-in-law's house. They tore through the roof, right? And they lowered the friend down. Pharisees were there that day. To pick up your mat and walk, there were Pharisees there that day.
I was about to say, well, maybe they just didn't see them.
It's specific.
Own eyes.
It is specific because he also said, your sins are forgiven. And then he talked about the Pharisees. He talks about the Pharisees being there. Mark does. Pharisees were there, and Jesus knew what they were thinking. And then he boom, he busted them. What's easier to say, this man, your sins are forgiven, or pick up your mat and walk? By the way, pick up your mat and walk. You're healed. Get out of here. And homeboy picks it up and runs off. Big hole in the ceiling, though. That's a problem. I'd be mad. Tore a hole in my ceiling.
But a man could walk. He could help fix it now.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be mad at Jesus. I'd be mad at the people that tore the hole in the ceiling.
I meant the man who can walk now is now
he
capable
can fix
of
it.
helping fix.
All right, you come back, fix my roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. They didn't have building permits and all those fun things back then. So it would have been a much easier situation.
So no need to be mad.
Yeah, well, no, I think there might have been. But Jesus is just beside himself with this. I mean, how he responds in verse 12, where he sighs. He sighed deeply in his spirit. Like, we have a child.
Yeah.
And sometimes, does our child ever make you sigh?
Yeah.
Does she ever make you sigh deeply in your spirit?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm starting to understand where he's coming from now.
Yes. With that and anybody that's a parent, you understand. Like, you can have a great kid. I think Charlie is a good kid. But there are moments. All children, they have those moments where they just exasperate you, and just...
I don't know that that's quite the same thing, because I feel like in those moments, those are highs and high emotion moments. So I don't necessarily sigh deep in my spirit. I would think of that as something as a long-standing, deep, slow to anger kind of.
So you take someone with a slow boil.
Yeah.
I've had some slow boiled days at my house.
I mean, I've seen some.
Where things just kind of stack until it's like, okay, it's now, punishment time. We got to go sit in your room or, whatever, time out, no TV, whatever. Had some of those. But I link it together because I just think that's a good explanation that I think a large majority of people can understand, that when you're just so frustrated with somebody and in that particular moment, you're done, you're baked, you're cooked.
What about there's times where, I don't know, I guess I kind of see where you're coming from, but it just seems like, have you ever shared with somebody over and over and over again, trying to get them to understand the truth and trying to get them to comprehend, and they just don't, and you finally realize they may never get it, and you just
I think there was I understand what you're coming from. I think there was a level of frustration with Christ, though. Here.
Yeah.
I think there was. I think he was just.
Oh, I'm not disregarding the frustration. I'm trying to say,
this.
I'm trying to put myself in that situation where I can understand it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I understand more of the Pharisees wanting another miracle. And that sounds bad, but I get that. I feel like I relate more to that than even to Christ's frustration, because...
Well, when I go back and I see, like, a lot of the miracles and things that he did, the Pharisees followed him around. I don't think people really realize that necessarily, that there very often was, while he was teaching and doing things, the Pharisees were following along, scribes, teachers. They were checking out what he was doing constantly. One of the reasons is because they wanted to find fault in what he was doing. So I think they saw a lot.
Okay.
Like I would, like the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, which is actually in the first part of this chapter. But I didn't want to do that topic again, just to do the feeding of the 5,000, because it's very, very similar. I would guess that there were Pharisees in that crowd. You know, like when he was at the one where lowering the men through the roof, Pharisees were there. When he stands to speak in the temple and he healed the man's hand who had the withered hand, that's in the book of Mark as well. They were there. They were there in all of those places. So they had seen all these things, and it was almost a situation of nothing will ever satisfy these people. Nothing.
Yeah.
And so he sees this, and he just tells them, I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign. So he basically says, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. But
he obviously knew. What's he saying by such sign? To make it completely obvious that he is the Messiah?
Yes. Some translations will actually use the word special sign. And so it was almost like they were wanting something bigger.
Yeah. Fire from heaven.
Yes.
Sort of.
They were going, the lame have walked, the blind see. I mean, they know, like the Pharisees know from John chapter 9, they know Jesus healed this man born blind. Like, no, they're not good enough. The lepers are healed. The dead are raised. Okay. Do we get much bigger than Lazarus?
Yeah.
Can you get bigger than that one? And now
this
Lazarus has not happened yet. But even after they see Lazarus, they still don't.
But don't some?
Nicodemus and Joseph Arimathea. And then once you get over to the book of Acts, after the resurrection, in the book of Acts, it does say some of the Pharisees did come to believe. But that Sanhedrin, those internal leaders, they never did. And many of the ones I think that even might have been leaning that way would not step out and say anything. They just kind of stay in the shadows watching. But the core of them would still not. Would still never believe, even after Lazarus. And they plotted not only to kill Jesus, but also in the Gospels it tells us they plotted to kill Lazarus too, because he was the greatest example, because the whole town knew he was dead and they put him in the grave and he was in there for days.
Maybe they explained it away in their minds somehow.
If they were explaining it away in their minds, why kill Lazarus?
Because he's part of that, like he's culpable.
Maybe. You may be onto something.
I don't know. You can't put yourself in their shoes at all in this moment. Like, I just find myself, the more I think about it, I relate to some of the things that the Pharisees believed and wanted. Like, sometimes I want more. God, why can't you just do this huge miraculous thing and make it obvious to this person who you are? Or, why can't you just do this, God, and then the nations would bow down to you? And he's not hiding himself, but why doesn't he make it easier or make it more obvious? Like, you've never felt that way?
I come at it specifically from the Gospels, and maybe in a modern flavor of like today. I think there are still so many miracles and there are things that God does that makes it extremely obvious But I think people tend to ignore them just like the Pharisees did. We don't want to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's another great example of that is the rich man and Lazarus in the parable. That when both of them died, the rich man and Lazarus, when they both died, Lazarus went to be in the presence of the Lord. He was in paradise. And the rich man said, just please let him go back and tell my brothers. And basically, it's like, no, because if they wouldn't believe your brothers, or they wouldn't believe the prophets, they're not going to believe this either.
Right.
So with everything that they had seen, I think one more thing wouldn't have made any difference.
I think that you're right in that, but they don't necessarily even understand that about themselves.
Yeah, they didn't even
He
see that
understood
for
that about them.
Maybe that may be true. You may be right.
I don't know. I feel like if there was something that could bring about that belief, I don't know. I think that he would do it. But sometimes people aren't going to believe no matter what.
And I think that's one of the things. Is the Pharisees hardened their hearts so much that they couldn't move off of that. They were so stuck. They were so set in their ways. They could never believe. They could never do anything. And that's tough. Because Jesus gave them opportunity after opportunity. What they saw was unbelievable. I mean, things they saw were amazing.
You think about like a scientist too. Today, to really understand and to come to know Christ, you really have to have this moment of realizing how small you are and how vast He is. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't think anyone better than a scientist who studies maybe galaxies or who works in medicine would understand the intricacies of what it took to create life and to sustain life.
Some do.
More than a scientist, but while some do and they see the hand of God in that, others explain it away or try to rationalize.
One of the things, and there's probably some parallels here. I think there's probably some parallels in reading some Christian apologists, specifically William Lane Craig, his book Reasonable Faith. What it really seemed to me is that a lot of the cosmologists, astrophysicists, they desperately almost don't want there to be anything else. And so from reading how they approach things, it's always with an eye towards how could everything create itself? Yeah. And there's no need for a creator of any kind, anywhere.
Make it fit into the narrative that they already believe.
Yeah, it doesn't matter even if it's like a watchmaker situation where there's a God or some kind of outside force that acted and created and then just walked away from it. They don't even want that, much less an active God involved in the world that He created. And it was fascinating as I read that book, and I highly recommend that book. That take your time though, because some of the pages you'll read them 5 times. But it's great. It's called Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig. And he goes into like all of these different ways that they try to create the universe without there having to be any outside force acting on. How can this happen by itself? And every time they're doing it, then they come to the point where that doesn't work. So it's like back to the drawing board, figuring another way. Oh, that doesn't work. And he goes through all these different ways like this. There's still extremely limited understanding of how the universe actually came to be created. Like from scientific point of view, just strictly going and looking at a physicist or somebody like that, a cosmologist, whoever. They can't explain. Like, there was at one point where it's like, okay, well, the universe expands and it contracts. And everything crunches down, and it gets so tight it bangs out again. No, now they're like, no, that doesn't work. The universe is not going to contract again. And so it's just on and on and on. And so they keep trying and looking for explanations, never looking towards the possibility that there's a God that acted on this. That's not an option. And I think for the Pharisees that was similar.
It's similar, yeah, because they have in their mind what they believe and who they think the future Messiah, because they obviously don't
Yes.
think that it's Christ
Yes.
here. They think the future Messiah is going to look this way, act this way, and he's going to do this thing.
Yes.
And because Christ didn't fit into that mold.
Yeah, they had to, and that's, yeah, they had to fit in that mold, just like this idea over here. We've got to get to fit in this mold, and we'll keep going at it until we make it fit in that mold. And some of the explanations and things that come up with to deal with this is just, make your head hurt. When time after time these things are getting knocked down. And Jesus continues to knock all these things down. And finally with them, he's just like, no, I won't do some great miraculous sign right now.
I mean, I don't know what it would have taken. I think maybe if he had
struck them all with a bolt of lightning.
I think if he had overthrown the Roman government and set himself up as king and uplifted the Pharisees into positions of authority, that would have done it. But then at the same time, they might have believed that he was the Messiah, but he came for the world. He didn't come just for the Jewish nation.
No. The Jewish nation were the first people he came to, but there's much more that happens outside of that. Mm-hmm. Like that was the first group because they were the covenant group. You know, they were God's chosen people that took his message to the world. And then outside of that,
but even from the beginning, they were supposed to be his name bearers, but so that the world would know who he is.
Yep. So all the surrounding nations, the surrounding nations would see and know and understand.
I mean, and I don't remember what the reference. I'm terrible with references. I think I missed that one the other day. I misspoke about something, but anyway, he says in the Old Testament, it's too little a thing what you have comprehended. I'm not here just for the Jewish nation. That's too small. Mm-hmm. I am here for the world.
Yeah, it's something much larger. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, I totally agree. And so he gets frustrated with them. And you go down to verse 13. He says, so he got back into the boat and left them. So he's just so frustrated. He's like, I'm done. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to do something productive. And the Father does that.
Yeah.
I mean, he does. There's moments where he took Israel as a nation and said, I'm going to turn you over to your sin. I'm going to turn you over to judgment. I'm going to step back and let you have what you want.
I think it gives us permission to also. And he talked to the disciples at one point. Did we read that part where, shake the dust from your feet part?
Yes.
There's permission there to not beat someone over the head. You're not going to force them.
Yeah, there comes a point where you move on.
It makes me sad to do that, but I feel like I've gotten to that place with a few people in my life today where I don't feel like another conversation with you is going to be productive. So...
yeah, if I feel like God leads me back into that conversation, wonderful. But
something
at this point,
else is going to have to happen to change your heart, and then we'll circle back to you.
At this point, I don't feel like God's leading me to continue having this conversation with you. There's other things I need to do and other people that I need to talk to and be a part of their lives and stuff. Yeah, I've had that. I've had some of those folks where before, you're just kind of like, well, I can't try harder for you than you try for yourself.
Exactly.
Like, I'm done. So he gets back in the boat. It says, and he left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat. As they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. And Herod being the king. He's not really a king. He's an underling of the emperor, the Roman emperor. But, they gave people some of the king titles, and it was... the Roman emperor could say off with their head in a second and they come in and chop his head off. So he's not a king like we think about David or Solomon. But Jesus' very interesting statement here is talking about the yeast. And so just a pinch, and how they would do it back then is a little bit like we do with some bread today. They would keep a little piece of the dough that then would be worked in with the next batch of dough to give it that leaven to rise, that yeast to rise. And just a little bit can cause the entire thing to rise, right?
Right.
And so that's what Jesus was telling them here. That watch out, because just a little bit of the Pharisees, just a little bit of Herod, their yeast will mess up everything. And this work was considered an illustration of sin and pride. And the presence of these people and their pride could absolutely mess up everything.
So what was it was pride, you think?
I think a lot was pride, control, I think was another one. Standing amongst the people, which links closely with pride. But I think there was personal pride, and they wanted to be the guys in front of the nation. Like, we're the important ones. You all look to us. Where Jesus was kind of stealing thunder there because of what he was doing. His teaching style, the miracles, the accessibility, just the way he approached everything was so different, and people were they were magnetically attracted to him. Not because of the way he looked, but because of just what he did, what he said. They were very drawn to him. So I think that there was that corrupting flavor there. And I think as Christians, we've got to be careful about that ourselves.
Well, and here's the overarching sin to all of that, is that you're wanting your own will to be done rather than God's will. Mm-hmm. You are wanting things to look the way that you want them to look, do the miracles that I think that you should do.
Yes, do it like I want you to.
Yes, rather than do it the way that God sees fit to do it. And that can be corrupting for even myself. Like, I feel convicted by this set of scripture because I was praying something just the other day that I think that's why I'm reminding myself that I can be like the Pharisees in that I want my will rather than God's will, which is not true. Like, I want God's will, but just a little bit of my will thrown in there can corrupt.
And I think all of us are prone to that. I think we all are. And it's in that moment of, okay, are we going to be like Christ and say, not my will, but your will?
Right.
Am I going to say, my way isn't the only way, God's way is the best? Are we going to submit to that?
Even when we don't understand it.
So I think that for Christians, this yeast or leaven of the Pharisees can easily come into us with some of that same kind of pride. And pride, to me, is really, it's the root of all sin.
You think so?
Because when you think about pride is
self-serving.
Mm-hmm. I'm right. I know best. My way's the way to do it. And that's the root of all sin, is thinking, I'll do it my way. And my way's the best.
I mean, I wouldn't have called it pride. I would have said selfishness, because I have felt in the past that selfishness is the root of all sin, but I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah, sure, I can put those very closely linked.
Yourself above all else, which is what you're saying.
And in pride, if I'm prideful about something, I think I'm right. Mm-hmm. And so at the heart of all sin is, you're saying by your actions, whether you admit it with your mouth or not, you're saying with your actions, my way is better than God's way. So I'm going to do it my way instead. And to me, that's the heart of pride, which leads into all sin. I think all sin kind of falls out of that.
Yeah, and I think especially for Christians, it's easy to do because we, just like I think the Pharisees did this also, they think that their way is God's way. And so everything that they do, they justify by saying this is what God would have it be.
Yes, and they couldn't see past themselves. And I think Christians can do that. We can do it sometimes, not even in something that necessarily at its heart is out and out sin. Mm-hmm. We can do that in so many ways, and wanting to control others around us, wanting to control our churches. I mean, there's so many ways that we can go about this. And my way's the only way, my way's the best way. Well, maybe not.
Yeah. And
if you're not in line with God, it definitely is not.
The hard thing is, though, it happens to me a lot. I often find myself thinking that, okay, well, I wanted it this way, and that's not how God wanted it to be. But it takes a moment of self-reflection to get to that place. And if we don't stop and allow that reflection to take place, then we're never even going to comprehend the fact that we're out of sync.
Yeah. And saying, okay, not mine, yours. Mm-hmm. This is not what I wanted, but God, this is what you have. This is what you've given me. This is where you've placed me. So obviously you have a purpose in this. Mm-hmm. So I'm along for the ride. And that's hard to do and there's really difficult moments. I think especially when we deal with illness, we deal with financial issues. I think especially when we deal with the consequences of things that are not really our fault. I joke with you oftentimes that there's a lot of, I spend a lot of my time working on problems that I had absolutely nothing to do with. Yes. But God places me in that moment for a reason, for me to be there. And sometimes I struggle with sometimes being okay with that. I'm like, but this isn't my mess. Why am I cleaning this up? Mm-hmm. But this is where God has placed me, and this is the spot He has me, and this is what He wants me to be doing right now. So instead of saying that, I need to say, okay, God, how can I make this better? Like, that's a failing in me that sometimes I can get frustrated with that of, yeah, why is this happening right now? It's because God's placed me here for this purpose. Maybe for me to help someone else, to teach me something, whatever it may be. I need to be okay with that.
Well, and also, I don't know if we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say, I feel like, too, a lot of times the world tells us what some of our responses should be. If someone wrongs you, your flesh response is to get back at them.
Yes.
And they would cheer that on, and the world would say, good for you for standing up to yourself, or good for you for doing that, or approving of a certain response that maybe Christ is telling you, that's not what I want. That's not what I have for you. I need you to be humble in this instant, or I need you to do things this way. So it's hard. It is hard, I think, not to let that little bit held back for ourselves.
And a little bit can wind up
it,
spoiling
yes,
a whole lot
all
of
it
things.
takes.
Just a little bit. Because it'll mess up so many things in our lives, and it will begin to infiltrate all through our lives, just like it did in the bread. It begins to move through all parts of our lives, all of our relationships. And so Jesus was warning them about this.
Yeah.
And that warning's for us today too, to not have that pride in it's got to be our way.
Yeah, I think we need to filter everything every day through Him and check it for
Agreed.
our will.
Agreed. Well, thank you guys for being here for our podcast today and joining us on either Facebook or YouTube. Be sure you subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Even click notifications so that you start to see when new things pop up. And be sure you're following us on Facebook. You can also enable notifications on Facebook. So when many messages and podcasts and things pop up, announcement videos, you'll get those right away. But we appreciate you guys, and we hope to see you in person real soon at FBC Okeechobee.